Everything changed overnight. A single deal worth $2.1 billion has shaken the balance of power in Africa. And for the first time in decades, America is no longer calling the shots. In the bustling capital of Burkina Faso, the atmosphere felt ordinary until President Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the stage. The young leader, known for his bold words but measured actions, carried a document that would soon make history. Cameras flashed as he spoke, his voice calm yet firm, announcing a $2.1 billion trade agreement that instantly stunned the nation and rippled across the world. This was not just another deal, it was a pivot, a break from the long shadow of American influence that had gripped Africa for generations. For decades, Washington had held the upper hand, controlling trade routes, investment flows, and political alliances. Africa's vast resources, gold, cotton, oil, and rare minerals, were often exported under terms that left little behind for its people. Traoré's decision challenged that entire system. The deal was crafted in secrecy, involving months of negotiation with partners outside the usual Western sphere. Few in his cabinet even knew the scale of what was coming until the moment he signed it. Reporters gasped as the numbers were revealed. Billions redirected toward infrastructure, energy, and agriculture, but under terms written by Africans for Africans. Traoré made it clear that this was not an act of hostility, but of liberation. He spoke of fairness, equality, and a future where his nation would no longer beg for crumbs at the table of foreign powers. Almost immediately, Washington was caught off guard. Analysts scrambled to understand how such a young leader could orchestrate such a bold move without American involvement. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Africa was no longer waiting for permission. In a single moment, Traoré shifted the balance of power. What seemed like an ordinary day had turned into a turning point, one that would be remembered for years to come. For years, frustration had been quietly building across Africa. Ordinary citizens saw their countries rich in gold, oil, cotton, and rare minerals, yet poverty remained their daily reality. Farmers worked endless hours only to sell their crops at unfair prices set by distant markets. Miners risked their lives underground while foreign companies reaped the profits. Small business owners struggled against imported goods that crushed local industries. Everyone knew something was wrong, but their voices were rarely heard. The United States, with its powerful grip on trade, often dictated the terms of these deals. Too many Africans. It felt less like partnership and more like dependency. President Traoré understood this anger because he had lived it. Born into a generation that had grown up watching promises of development fade into disappointment, he carried the weight of his people's frustrations on his shoulders. He listened carefully to the complaints of workers, students, and families who wanted more than survival. They wanted dignity. Traoré realized that aid packages and loans from abroad only kept the cycle going, binding nations to endless debt while stripping them of control over their own futures. He believed that true independence would only come when Africa wrote its own rules. Behind closed doors, he spoke passionately about the unfairness of old agreements. He saw how one-sided contracts had turned his nation into a supplier of raw resources, while others abroad grew wealthy processing and selling the finished products. This imbalance left Africans with little more than scraps of their own wealth. The young president's determination grew stronger with each passing year. By the time he rose to power, he was ready to act. His bold pivot was not just about money, it was about breaking free from the chains of dependency and demanding respect on the world stage. The announcement of new trade partners shook old expectations to the core. Instead of relying on the same Western powers that had dominated Africa's economy for decades, President Traoré welcomed fresh allies from Asia, the Middle East, and even neighboring African nations. These partners did not come with lectures or hidden political conditions. They came with offers of technology, infrastructure, at fairer terms. For the first time, discussions at the negotiating table felt balanced, as if Africa's voice truly mattered. The agreements promised more than just buying and selling. They promised transformation. One deal focused on building modern railways to connect remote villages with bustling cities, unlocking markets for farmers and small traders who had long been cut off. Another agreement brought plans for renewable energy plants, ensuring electricity could reach homes, schools, and factories in areas that had remained in the dark for generations. Digital technology companies from Asia offered training programs for young Africans. aiming to turn them into developers and innovators rather than just consumers of imported gadgets. Asterisk, the shift was dramatic. Instead of exporting raw materials at low prices and importing expensive finished goods, Traore's vision placed Africa on the path to becoming a producer. Factories were planned to process cotton into clothing, cocoa into chocolate, and minerals into electronics. Each step meant jobs, skills, and pride staying within the continent. Asterisk, across Africa, excitement grew. Ordinary citizens spoke of new opportunities and a brighter future, while leaders in other countries quietly watched, wondering if they could follow this path. The message was clear. Africa was no longer content to be the world's supplier of raw wealth. With new partners at its side, the continent was stepping into a role it had long been denied, that of a creator, builder, and equal force in global trade. Asterisk, in Washington, the reaction was immediate and furious. News of Traore's $2.1 billion trade pivot spread through government halls like wildfire, leaving officials scrambling for answers. For decades, America had enjoyed unquestioned dominance in Africa, shaping trade deals and securing resources with little resistance. Now, almost overnight, that grip was slipping. The shock was not just about money, it was about power. Traore's move signaled that Africa no longer saw the United States as its inevitable partner. For American politicians, it was a humiliating wake-up call. Asterisk, inside closed-door meetings, anger mixed with disbelief. How could a young leader in one of the world's poorest countries orchestrate such a bold maneuver? Without American involvement, intelligence agencies had failed to predict it, and businesses that relied on African resources feared massive losses. Lobbyists pressed Congress to act, warning that billions were at stake and that rivals like China or the Middle East would now gain ground. Some officials demanded sanctions or pressure tactics, while others whispered about rethinking America's entire approach to Africa. Asterisk, the media added fuel to the fire. Headlines spoke of betrayal and the collapse of U.S. influence. Talk shows debated whether Washington had underestimated Africa's growing independence. Analysts pointed out that America had long taken its role for granted, offering aid and deals that benefited itself more than the nations it claimed to help. Traore's pivot exposed the weakness in this approach for all to see. Asterisk, back in Africa, however, the outrage from Washington only strengthened the sense of pride among ordinary people. To them, America's anger proved the importance of what had been done. For the first time in living memory, it was not Washington setting the agenda, it was Africa, and that realization changed everything. Asterisk, across the streets of Ouagadougou, celebration filled the air. Young people marched with flags, vendors cheered in markets, and families spoke with pride about a future they could finally believe in. President Traore's bold decision had become more than a trade deal, it was a symbol of freedom. For generations, Africans had watched their wealth flow abroad while their own communities struggled. Now, for the first time, they felt that their resources, their labor, and their dreams were being invested back into their own land. Schools began receiving funding for new classrooms, hospitals saw improvements in equipment, and the foundation stones of factories were laid with the promise of jobs for thousands. Asterisk, beyond Burkina Faso, neighboring countries were inspired. Leaders in West and Central Africa quietly studied Traore's blueprint, weighing whether they could break free from the long grip of foreign control. The shift spread hope, showing that Africa did not have to remain a silent player in global affairs. If one leader could take a stand and win better terms, perhaps the entire continent could rise together. Asterisk, meanwhile, the old powers watched nervously, realizing that the days of dictating the rules were fading. America's outrage could not stop the momentum that had already begun. Africa was learning to negotiate from a place of strength rather than weakness, and Traore's deal had proven it was possible. Asterisk, in the hearts of ordinary people, the change was deeply personal. A farmer dreamed of selling his harvest at a fair price. A student imagined building a career in technology without leaving her homeland. And a miner believed his work would finally bring dignity to his family. The $2.1 billion pivot was not just history, it was the dawn of a new era. Africa was standing tall. At this time, the world had no choice but to listen. Asterisk, if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the word. Asterisk, subscribe to Faso Histories for more powerful stories that shape our world. Asterisk.